Shares in WPP slumped to the bottom of the FTSE 100 after the company downgraded its full-year profit margins. Second quarter net sales in its biggest market, the United States, slumped by 3.3%, deteriorating from the first quarter. Now, despite this, the ad agency increased its net sales target for the full year. Ian Whittaker is the head of media research at Liberum and joins me now to discuss. Ian, thanks so much for coming in.
No problem.
So, on first glance, it seems like a bit of a mixed bag in terms of the earnings. So I'm wondering why we saw such a knee-jerk reaction to the downside in terms of the stock price.
No, I think that's absolutely right. As you said, they slightly increased their top-line guidance, but obviously brought the margin guidance down. If you were to put everything in the mix, I mean, there shouldn't really be sort of rationally a huge amount of change to estimates moving forwards. I think what you have here, though, is that you have a stock where, for many investors, their view on it is probably half empty rather than half full. And so when you get those situations, particularly in a sector like media, where you have all the question marks over what are the structural challenges facing many of these companies moving forwards and how they will react to them, that essentially what happens is any piece of news that is seen as even remotely slightly negative gets leapt on, and there's a disproportionate impact.
So I want to get onto those kind of structural challenges in a minute, but the United States was one of the key areas of weakness in terms of sales. There's a lot of competition on Madison Avenue, whether it's from the tech companies or, you know, elsewhere. So the consultancies, for example. So I'm wondering whether you think WPP can regain its top spot there.
Well, I think if you look at the particular businesses that were in North America and that were weak, the two that stood out were the creative agencies and data, which would be market research essentially. Now, if you take those sort of two areas, creative, what's quite interesting, if you look at the other agency groups in terms of their North American performance, there's actually been a wide variance. It looks though Omnicom and Interpublic are actually doing much better in terms of those performances. So it would suggest that in terms of creative, there is something there that is maybe more WPP specific, whether that's to do with the management of individual agencies, whether it's to do with particular clients, or so on. If you were to take market research, the data investment arm, there are obvious secular questions that have been around that industry, particularly in sort of the more ad hoc type of business. You've seen companies like Nielsen, for example, have very weak results and so forth. So that is more perhaps of a secular question, but market research as a whole is just over 10% of WPP's profit base. The main thing in North America seems to be creative, and that seems to be something that can be fixed. The crucial thing in North America is media, which is probably the highest margin part of WPP's business, certainly the part of the business where it requires scale, that actually looks to be going very well at the moment for WPP.
Now, we're expecting to get a strategic review by the end of the year from the new CEO, Mark Reed. Now, Martin Sorrell, obviously, he grew the business very inorganically, a lot of acquisitions from all the way back to the 1980s. So I'm wondering whether you think this new CEO is going to continue with this sort of acquisitive growth path. Well,
if you look at, again, going back with Martin Sorrell, I mean, he did a fantastic job of building up a collection of assets altogether. I mean, there is no WPP now, depending on who you would believe, is either the first or number two of the big global agency groups. So, key point there is, do they really need to expand that much more aggressively? There are always acquisitions that they would do that obviously are higher growth companies would be attractive. Also as well, comment that was made at the results is potentially they will look also as well for taking minority stakes in faster growing businesses as well. So it is very, very unlikely you'll see anything of the scale of the acquisitions you've seen in the past. All agency groups make deals just simply to refresh their asset base. The other interesting thing for WPP when they give their strategy update is where they look to dispose of any units. And obviously the key one that people will focus on there is in terms of these data investment management or market research assets that the company has.
So it mentioned actually in the results today that it is considering selling off a stake in that data business, Kantar. So do you think that's likely to happen?
Well, I think if you look at the wording of the statement, it obviously talks about underperforming assets, and if you take Kantar as a whole, that business has been underperforming the group for a number of years. Obviously, it has got some very good assets within there. It's obviously, as I said, it's just over 10% of profits for WPP. I think they will take a deep look at it, and I think at this stage a sale can't be ruled out. At the same time as well, they haven't been explicit in turning around and say they will definitely sell that business either whole or indeed part. Or what they may look to do is a partnership with other providers as well.
Now, a lot of discussion in the market is about the agency model, whether it might be dead or whether it's just kind of in a period of flux. Obviously, Mark Reed is going for the latter. I wanted to get your thoughts on that. Obviously, there's a lot of competition from in-housing, consultancies, the tech firms, like I mentioned earlier. So do you think it's dying or more kind of just in a transition phase?
No, I don't think it's dying at all. I think it's more in a transition phase. I mean, the sort of structural issues, I think, around the agencies often get overdone. If you look at what the single biggest component of the agency's profitability base is, it's the media buying business, media buying and planning, by far the single most important division for the agency groups. If you look at what all the agency groups have said so far, that is growing very well. And if you look at the reason, there is a reason for that, in the sense that, first of all, it is actually a business where scale counts, and the agencies have scale. And second of all, as well, it can be quite complex for companies to actually take that business in-house. And you're seeing signs that some companies have thought they could do it and then realise that they can't. I think when it comes to consultancies, there's been a lot of sort of talk about consultancies moving into the business, and there's no doubt the consultancies are moving into the agencies' businesses, the agencies are moving into the consultancies' businesses. So they are actually sort of competing more and more. But certainly when you look at these media contracts, one thing that particularly stands out is the consultancies, quite frankly, are just not winning any of these big contracts.
And just finally, I had a quick skim over the PE ratios of WPP and its peers, and it looks like WPP is trading at a bit of a discount. It's at 7.91 when I last checked, Omnicom 12.93, Publicis 15.85. So is that a metric that you look at closely? And also, what's your top sector pick?
Well, I think if you were to look at the agency groups, sort of within there, no doubt WP has been disproportionately impacted compared with the other agency groups. Part of that could be just geographical focus. Omnicom Interpublic are listed in the States, Publicis is more continental Europe and so forth. There's no doubt that WPP probably has borne the brunt from what happened in 2017, when there were a number of downgrades that came through in terms of the profit and revenue forecasts. Some groups have actually been doing very well, for example Interpublic, in terms of their numbers as well. But there is no doubt that there's too large a valuation gap between WP and the other agencies, in essentially a business which, quite frankly, there is not a huge amount of difference in the investment cases between the major global agency groups. I think if we was to look at the agencies specifically here on those, I think when we look at WPP, we definitely would be positive on WPP in terms of the outlook, both from a secular standpoint and also as well from a company standpoint. Obviously early days in terms of the new CEO and what he intends to do, but as you said, in terms of the valuation looks too low given the quality of the assets.
All right, Ian, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
That was Ian Whittaker, Head of Media Research at Liberum. Thank you for watching IGTV. I'm Victoria Scholar, and we'll see you very soon.
Subscribe to IG for educational content, company insight, financial analysis and expert commentary.